Shalom Hadavarniks. Welcome to Hadavar Messianic Ministries and our School of Biblical and Jewish Studies. We're studying Messianic Prophecy, Rabbinic and Messianic Views, and this is Session 5. So let's review Session 4. In Session 4, we were finishing up Genesis 3:15 by discussing Jewish positions or objections to the prophecy. We looked at the naturalistic position and the corporate symbolic position. The naturalistic position stated that Genesis 3:15 is a prediction of conflict between man and snakes and nothing more. The corporate symbolic position stated that the passage teaches about a struggle between good and evil people and nothing more. Then we summarize Genesis 3:15 in these points. Genesis 3:15 teaches that the Messiah will be a human being, a male. However, Messiah will be of unique birth because he will also be a supernatural person like Satan is a supernatural person. In fact, Messiah will be the God-man who will defeat Satan. The Messianic person will be bruised in this battle, but he will victoriously crush Satan's head. The Messiah's descent will be traced through his mother. Well, that finished up Genesis 3:15, so we moved on to the Lion of Judah in Genesis 49:10. The type of prophecy, it is a blend prophecy. The first part of the blend is the statement, until Shiloh comes, which refers to the first coming. And then the second statement, to him shall be the obedience of the peoples, refers to the second coming. And right between the two of them is the little word and. The little word and is a placeholder for some 2,000 years approximately. Approximately 2,000 years have elapsed between these two phrases to date. So this is two prophecies blended into one sentence. Two prophecies blended into one verse. So this is a blend prophecy. Then as far as the New Covenant usage goes, it's a literal prophecy and has a literal fulfillment. Then we began to look into the background of Genesis 49:10. The most significant element of the background is the Abrahamic covenant. The Abrahamic covenant is an unconditional, eternal, unilateral covenant that God made with the Jewish people. It consists of three basic promises: the land promise, which is the land of Israel; the national promise, which is the state of Israel; and the spiritual blessing promise, which is salvation by faith in the Messiah. Then we began our exposition of verses 1 through 12. First with the assembling of the nations in verses 1 and 2. Midrash Rabbah lays out the reason why Jacob assembled his sons before him. And Jacob called unto his sons. Why did he call them? In order to reveal to them the end, the Messianic redemption. And we totally agree. He said that I may tell you what will befall you in the days to come, in the future. Jacob's blessing began with Reuben in verses 3 and 4. He should have received the double blessing as the firstborn, but he lost the double blessing because of sexual misconduct. Then Jacob spoke of Simon, and he also lost the double blessing because of vicious anger. The double blessing did not pass on down to him. Neither did it pass on down to Levi. He lost the double blessing because of vicious anger. And finally we come to son number 4, Judah, and Judah inherited the Messianic line. Now Judah means praised, and Judah, the tribe, received the promise of leadership, victory, and tribal stability. So it exemplified these blessings by being first in population, by being first in marching order, by being first to fight for the promised land, in supplying the first judge, and the tribe was the first to have royalty permanently reside in the tribe. Another key element to the prophecy is the Davidic covenant, which can be summed up in the column on the right side of the screen. A succession of kings will always govern the nation of Israel, culminating in the Messiah. That's a summary of the Davidic covenant. Then we moved on to Genesis 49:9, which stated that Judah is a lion's whelp. And in this picture of Judah, we see growth and maturity. Judah starts out as a playful cub, a whelp, a lion's whelp. But then he grows into a young man, and finally he matures into a magnificent animal. Now the Midrash Rabbah refers to Judah as a lion's whelp with this statement. Rabbi Hama ben Rabbi Hanina said, this alludes to Messiah, son of David, who is descended from the two tribes. So the Messiah is the Lion of Judah. We looked at the Genesis 49 time frames as well, and we saw that in verses 1 through 9, the prophet was speaking to his own sons, the ones gathered around his deathbed at his present time, during his present time. But then as he gets to verse 10, he jumps thousands of years into the future, and he begins to deal with the first coming in the first part of verse 10. And that's where we pick up the new material at this point. We've looked at Judah in verses 8 and 9. Now we look at the timing for the coming of the Messiah in the first part of verse 10. We read, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet until Shiloh comes." Now this verse is an extremely important and significant messianic verse. Quoting from the ArtScroll Tanakh commentary, this is an Orthodox Jewish commentary. Rabbi Zlotovitz is one of the editors of the commentary. Rabbi Zlotovitz makes this remark: "The general consensus, with few exceptions, of rabbinic interpretation is that this phrase refers to the coming of the Messiah. The passage, accordingly, constitutes the primary Torah source for the belief that the Messiah will come." Pretty important verse. The overwhelming consensus of rabbinic commentary interprets this verse to allude to the Messiah. So according to Rabbi Zlotovitz, this is a foundational verse in the Bible. So we're going to spend a good bit of time on this verse, because this is a bedrock verse from which our understanding of the Messiah's coming is going to be built. Now, at least 13 prominent rabbinic commentators agree that this is a messianic verse. You know, to get 13 Jewish people to agree on anything is a miracle in itself. So, referring to the ArtScroll Tanakh commentary, Rashi says that the verse refers to the Messiah. Targum Onkelos renders the verse as referring to the Messiah. Nachmanides agrees, as does Rabbi Ashtruk in his commentary, Midrashei Torah. Gur Arya agrees. Rabbi Sforno agrees. The Midrash Tanchuma agrees. The Jerusalem Targum agrees. Targum Pseudo Jonathan, likewise. Yalkut, the Talmud, Midrash Rabbah. So it's no wonder with this tremendous number of agreement, tremendous amount of agreement, that Rabbi Shlomo Riskin concurs. Now, Rabbi Shlomo Riskin is an Orthodox rabbi. He's from the Lincoln Square Synagogue in New York City, but he's moved to Israel, and today he's the founding chief rabbi in Efrat, Israel. So from his article in the International Jerusalem Post in 2001 called "Awaiting the Messiah," we read, "Our sages understand that the initial reference to the emergence of a messianic line in Judaism is to be found in the blessing to Judah, who is the progenitor of Boaz, Yishai, and David, model and ancestor of the long-awaited Messiah." So let's examine such an important verse of Scripture. We begin with the scepter in verse 10. Now the scepter began as the shepherd's staff. Israel's rulers were considered to be the shepherd of the people, and this may be one of the reasons why God chose David to be Israel's king. David had been a shepherd, and as such he gained a proper understanding of the leadership role. This is also why Yeshua referred to himself as the good shepherd. Next, the scepter is an emblem of kingship, a symbol of regal command. In the hand of the ruler, it was a symbol of his power. The king held the scepter in his hand while speaking in public assemblies. And when he sat down on his throne, he rested it between his feet, and he inclined it toward himself. I'm the big deal here. I'm the leader of this assembly here. All right, this idea is clearly seen in Psalm 60, verse 7, and Psalm 108:8. Both verses read, Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim also is the helmet of my head, Judah is my scepter. Judah is the source of my power and authority and leadership. It's the prominent tribe. And the concept is even carried over into our day, into the body of Messiah. The leaders of the local congregation are considered to be under-shepherds of the Good Shepherd, Yeshua. Now at this point we come to a phrase in verse 10 that has caused the spilling of untold gallons of ink on paper. The phrase is the statement rendered in the NASB, until Shiloh comes. Five different positions have been generated by this difficult phrase, each with its own adherents, its own supporters. Now, I'm not going to develop all 5 positions. Suffice it to say, we will look at the positions that have the most textual support and fit the context. Now, the exact wording of the statement varies between translations. Many English versions render the statement like the NASB, the scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until Shiloh comes. Now, this approach makes Shiloh as a title for the Messiah. Now, as such, Genesis 49:10 becomes the source of the rabbinic name for the Messiah, Sanhedrin 98a. What is the name of the Messiah? They of the school of Rav Shila said, his name is Shiloh, or Shiloh. Now, unfortunately, using the word Shiloh as if it's a proper name for the Messiah, obscures the meaning of the phrase. Now, the word Shiloh should be taken as a possessive pronoun, not a proper name. This is how the Septuagint translates the verse, as does the Syriac version. So this reading is further supported by a comparison with Ezekiel 21:27. In Ezekiel 21:27, a similar phrase and construction is used. Therefore, the best translation is done by the New International Version. The scepter shall not depart or will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he comes to whom it belongs. A very different rendering, isn't it? The point is that Judah's identity and right to rule cannot be lost until someone comes who has full rights to the scepter. Judah's superiority cannot be lost until someone comes who has full claim to his right to rule. So those who reign from the house of Judah will do so in anticipation of the one to whom kingship truly belongs. And now we need to turn our attention to that tiny little time indicator, until. The prophecy pivots around the word until. The scepter, the ruler's staff, Judah's dominance, will not depart until the Messiah appears. This is the real key and significance of the verse. The Messiah will have to come before the tribe of Judah loses its prominence and identity. Now, this establishes a clear time period for the prophecy. The timing of the Messiah's appearance is the most important point. Now, when did the tribe of Judah lose its prominence and identity? Now, the records of tribal identities were kept and maintained in the temple, and all of these records were lost with the destruction of the temple in 70 A.D. Within a few generations, all the tribes of Israel, with the exception of Levi, had lost their identity. The only Jewish people associated with the tribe of Levi know their identity. The rest of us, including Judah, are identified as B'nai Yisrael, and that's my situation. You know, I asked my mom when I was a teenager, well, Mom, what tribe are we with? And she said, well, we really don't know. Some in the family think that we're associated with the tribe of Levi. Well, why is that, Mom? Well, that's because one of your great-grandfathers living in the Ukraine used to be a scribe. He used to write out the Torah scroll. Well, that's hardly a strong evidence that I'm of the tribe of Levi. So I might not be, I might be, I might not be, but I do know I'm with B'nai Yisrael, as do most Jewish people. All right. Now, since the tribe of Judah lost its preeminence and identity in 70 AD, it can clearly be seen that the Messiah must have come sometime before 70 AD. Now, it is not possible for the Messiah to come after 70 AD. And why? He can't prove he's from Judah. He can't do that. It's impossible today. In addition, the Messiah had to come by 30 AD or later. This is the other bookend to the prophecy, the other side. He had to come before 70 AD, but he had to become by 30 AD or later. Why? Well, the Babylonian Talmud, Avodah Zarah 8b, tells us that the authority to exercise capital punishment was removed from the Sanhedrin by the Romans in 30 AD. Here's what we read. 180 years before the Second Temple was destroyed, the evil Roman Empire stretched forth over Israel and ruled over them. 40 years before the temple was destroyed, that's 30 AD, the Sanhedrin was exiled from the chamber of hewn stone and sat in the store near the Temple Mount. Now the Babylonian Talmud, Sanhedrin 41a, adds some additional information. The Gemara continues its question, and it is taught in a Baraita. Now a Baraita is non-Talmudic rabbinic literature. It is taught in a Baraita. 40 years before the destruction of the Second Temple, that's 30 AD, the Sanhedrin was exiled from the chamber of hewn stone and sat in the store near the Temple Mount. Once the Sanhedrin left the chamber of hewn stone, the court's power to judge capital cases was nullified. All right, what's the significance of that? Why do I bring in this bookend, the other end of the time frame? Why? Because the scepter had been removed from Judah. Judah's preeminence had ended in 30 AD. And in 30 AD, the Messiah had come, exactly as Genesis 49:10 predicted he would come. So the point is that the ancient Jewish interpretation recognized unmistakably that a time frame for the Messiah's coming is clearly laid out in Genesis 49:10, the first part of the verse. And this is supported also by the Jerusalem Talmud, Sanhedrin 118a. It was taught 40 years before the destruction of the temple, the right to judge capital cases was withdrawn. And again, why my note? Because of the exile from the chamber of hewn stone. And now we know exactly where the chamber of hewn stone was located. This is a floor plan of Herod's temple. Now this floor plan was done by Rittmeyer, and it's probably the best floor plan we have in existence today. But anyway, here is the Hall of Hewn Stone. That's where it was located, right in the midst of that yellow box there. Now we can also take a look at the Hall of Hewn Stone in this drawing of Herod's temple, and it's the fourth hall from the front, and that's the Hall of Hewn Stone right there. So we know exactly where it was. However, we had this information, but we, the Jewish people, refused to heed this information about the Messianic timeline. The scepter was taken away from Judah at that precise moment, 30 AD. Why? So that the Romans could crucify Yeshua. Now, Psalm 22 and Yeshua in Matthew 20:19 both predicted that he would be crucified. And here's Psalm 22:16. They pierced my hands and my feet. That's crucifixion. And then in Matthew 20:19, and will hand him, that's Yeshua, over to the Gentiles to mock and scourge and pierce his hands and his feet. Crucify him. Now, crucifixion was a Roman method of execution, not a Jewish method. The Romans took control of the death penalty in 30 AD. Therefore, the scepter, the authority, had been removed from Judah at that precise moment to fulfill God's word. Now, verse 10, to this point, brings us to the first coming of the Messiah. This passage can only be speaking of one person. There is only one person in history who lived in Israel before 70 A.D. and who fulfills the requirements of the passage and who claimed to be the Messiah. And that person was Yeshua. Now here's the Messianic timeline. And Yeshua's earthly career began with his birth in 6 or 7 B.C., and it terminated with his crucifixion and ascension in 30 A.D., and then the temple was destroyed in 70 A.D. And so the Messiah had to be on the scene between 30 A.D. and 70 A.D. He had to be on the scene, and he had to be able to prove his tribal descent. So that's the time frame for the Messiah, between 30 A.D. and 70 A.D. Now in Luke 3, we have a record of his genealogy, his tribal identity. We know what tribe and family Yeshua came from. It was verified through the temple records. Yeshua is a descendant of Judah, as well as the descendant of the royal family of David. Now in Luke 1, Yeshua is stated to be the final king of Judah's royal supremacy. And this annunciation was made to Mary by the angel Gabriel. The angel Gabriel announced the birth of the Messiah to Miriam, his mother, and the angel makes this statement in Luke 1, 31 to 33. And behold, you will conceive in your womb and bear a son, and you shall name him Yeshua, and he will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. And the Lord God will give him the throne of his father David, and he will reign over the house of Jacob forever, and his kingdom will have no end. So Judah's prominence reaches its greatest glory with the coming of the Messiah. There's growth here. Judah's prominence grows from a young cub to a young lion to a mature, magnificent animal. However, we, the Jewish people, rejected Yeshua as our Messiah King when he came the first time. Yeshua went back to his heavenly throne until the time when the Jewish people will call for him to return. It's at that time, sometime in the future, he'll return to destroy his enemies, save his people, and institute the Messianic kingdom. Now, because of this fact of history, there's a time gap between what we have seen so far and the last phrase of verse 10. Now, please refer to the following diagram. This is how the timing of each phrase breaks down. The scepter will not depart from Judah, nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, refers to the period from 1700 BC all the way down to 6 or 7 BC, approximately 1700 years. Now, the word until brings us to Yeshua's first coming. His first coming extended from the years 6 and 7 BC until 30 AD. That's Yeshua's time frame. Now, Jacob told us the Messiah will appear before 70 AD, and that was exactly the time when Yeshua was on the scene. Okay? Please note that the very important word until does not mean that Judah will possess the scepter and then lose royal authority when the Messiah comes. Rather, the word until speaks of the apex of Judah's rule. It speaks of the enlargement of Judah's rule, the perpetuity of Judah's rule through the Messiah. Judah is a young cub, a young lion, a mature animal. Judah's rule will reach its greatest glory when the Messiah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, appears. Now, today, Judah's king sits at the right hand of the Father in glory, and I don't think you can get more glorious than that. So the first part of verse 10 describes the first coming segment of the blend prophecy. Then the time gap exists, some 2,000 years to date, between that phrase and the final phrase of the verse. Now, that time frame, that time gap, includes the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. And that time gap is covered by that little connective word, and. There it is, our key word, and. Now, the time frame also includes the church age, and it includes the tribulation period. So that little word "and" covers the time from 30 AD until the return of Yeshua and the institution of the Messianic kingdom. That little word "and" summarizes approximately 2,000 years. It is during the Messianic kingdom that the final phrase of verse 10 will be fulfilled. The obedience of the nations is his. That's the second coming. That's when it starts. So not only will Yeshua reign over Israel, but he will likewise reign over all the nations of the world, as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Now the last phrase of verse 10 takes us into the second coming segment of the blend prophecy. In the words of Rabbi Munk in the Art Scroll Tanakh commentary, until the Messiah's coming, Judah will hold the royal scepter in the midst of his own nation. But the Messiah, the descendant of David, will reign over the gathered nations. Now, we've already stated our understanding that the word Shiloh would be better rendered to whom it belongs. Now, before moving on, it would be appropriate to explain in more detail the two understandings of that phrase. So the two understandings, Shiloh and to whom it belongs. Now the term Shiloh is found in the NASB, in the King James Version, the Amplified, the Emphasized, the JPS 1917, etc. In contrast, the term to whom it belongs is found in the NIV and the NET. But remember, no matter which position you take, and I don't care which position you take, because both of these positions refer to the Messiah. I think there's a better position, but both of them refer to the Messiah. So, number one, the first position. Shiloh is a title of the Messiah. This title denotes the one who brings peace, or the rest giver. This understanding is of the opinion that the word Shiloh is derived from the Hebrew word shalach, which means safe or secure. Consistent with this meaning, the Messiah, as the giver of peace, is found in other messianic passages, such as Isaiah 9:6. For a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will rest on his shoulders, and his name will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Eternal Father, Prince of Peace. So that's the first position, and it is a reasonable position. But I think the second position is better. And the second position, Shiloh, is an abbreviation for until he comes, whose it is. This is very, very similar to our abbreviation, ASAP, our little word ASAP, as soon as possible. Now, we'll talk about that later. Now, this is supported by the Septuagint, which renders the verse or the phrase to whom it is laid up for. In a similar manner, the Syriac, the Peshitta, the Syriac Old Testament, renders the phrase, until he comes, whose it is. And this rendering is paralleled in Ezekiel 21:27. A ruin, a ruin, a ruin, I will make it. This also will be no more until he comes, whose right it is, and I will give it to him. Now, the Hebrew terms, loosely translated, he comes whose right it is, are the words asher lo. Asher lo. This is the word asher, and that is the word lo. Asher lo. Now, when explaining that phrase, the Jewish commentary, the Sanchino books of the Bible, refers the reader back to Genesis 49:10 with the comment, the phrase, until he come whose right it is, recalls the Messianic prophecy of Genesis 49:10. Now, the reason why the Sanchino commentary makes this statement lies in the fact that the two phrases in the two verses have a similar construction. The main similarity lies in the fact that Genesis 49:10 text is an abbreviation of the same two Hebrew words, asher lo. There's asher lo. Shiloh. Now, Shiloh is made up of the letter Shin. There's the letter Shin, which is an abbreviation for asher. And asher is the relative pronoun who or whom. Now, the second syllable, lo, that's the preposition lamed, meaning to, at, in reference to, etc., combined with the third person masculine singular pronoun him. And together these two words produce the word Shiloh. There it is, Shiloh. Now Shiloh is an abbreviation that means to him whom it belongs. To use a modern English illustration of this literary idea, Shiloh would be similar to our word ASAP. ASAP is simply an abbreviation of the phrase as soon as possible. 4 words are abbreviated and represented by their first letter, and then these 4 letters are joined together to form the new word ASAP. And so the new word is a shortened way to express that phrase. Get that done ASAP. It's a new word. We've created a new word. Well, that's the same thing that's happening with Shiloh here. Then in verse 10 closes with a glimpse of the peace that will dominate the world during the reign of the Messiah, of the Messianic King. The Messiah's reign will be characterized by obedience, and this will be the means of achieving peace. Obedience will be the means of achieving peace. Now, the extent of Messianic peace is described in 2 segments. The first segment was described back in chapter 49, verse 8. Judah, your brothers will praise you. Your hand shall be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons shall bow down to you. So his peace will extend over the tribes of Israel. But secondly, his peace will extend worldwide. And here we come to point D, the result of worldwide leadership. Peace will encompass the nations of the world, as stated in chapter 49, verse 10, second part of the verse. And to him shall be the obedience of the peoples. Now, other sections of Scripture emphasize over and over and over that the Messiah will rule the earth with resolute power and authority. But, yes, he will rule. But there will be a measure of sin in the kingdom. Not as much as we know today, but there will be a small measure of sin in the kingdom, and this will make his power and authority necessary. So the scepter of his authority will be worldwide and unbending. Psalm 2, 8 and 9. Ask of me, and I will surely give the nations as your inheritance, and the very ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with what? A rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware. And into the Brit Hadashah, the New Covenant, Revelation 2:27, and he shall rule them with what? A rod of iron. As the vessels of the potter are broken in pieces, as I also have received authority from my Father. Revelation 12:5. And she gave birth to a son, a male child, who is to rule all the nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up to God and to his throne. And finally, Revelation 19:15, from his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with a rod of iron. And he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. That's all references to the second coming. Yeshua coming and destroying the armies of the Antichrist. So at this point, Jacob moves on to describe the prosperity associated with the Messianic kingdom itself. We now get another tiny glimpse, just a tiny glimpse, a glorious peek at what awaits us in the future. So here's our timeline. The second coming then gives way to the Messianic kingdom, and we experience the glories of the kingdom for 1,000 years. And by the way, after the kingdom comes the eternal state. But it is not revealed. The eternal state is not revealed in the Hebrew Scriptures. It's revealed in the Greek Scriptures in the book of Revelation. And here we move into eternity, and time as we know it changes. We become eternal in nature. Now, as far as our time frame chart goes, we've looked at the first coming in chapter 49, verse 10, first part of the verse. Then we move to the second coming in the second part of chapter 49, verse 10. And now we've moved into the kingdom in verses 11 and 12. So we're going to look at the conditions of the world, and we start in Genesis 49:11. He, Judah, ties his foal to the vine, and his donkey's colt to the choice vine. He washes his garments in wine, and his robes in the blood of grapes. Now, the idea being extravagantly expressed is the idea of Judah's prosperity. The pronouns he and his in verse 11 refer to Judah as the representative of his tribe, not the Messiah. Remember, as you read this verse, kingdom prosperity will not be limited to the tribe of Judah. It will extend beyond Judah to all Israel and beyond Israel to the entire world. Now, the donkey in biblical thinking is a symbol of peace and well-being. In contrast, the horse is a symbol of war. The Messiah will bring to Judah and to the world the reign of peace. And now vineyards and wine are symbols of prosperity and blessing. In the kingdom, valuable commodities will be so abundant that they will be put to common everyday use. Now, the thrust of the imagery is that prosperity and blessing will be so plentiful that even the choicest vines will be put to such ordinary use as tethering animals. One will be able to tie his donkey to the choicest plant and be unconcerned about how much of it he has for lunch. Let him eat freely, because choice vines are flourishing everywhere. Another lavish picture closes verse 11. That picture is that of wine. Wine will be so plentiful that the people of Judah can wash their clothes in it. The wine would dye their clothes a royal purple, and the average person would be dressed in royalty. So verse 11 is a one-verse summary of the extreme and lavish abundance that will be found in the kingdom. There will be no more famines, no more poverty, no more war. Only an excess of joy and fullness. Now, the description of the Messianic kingdom closes in verse 12 by explaining the characteristics of the people who will inhabit the kingdom, period. So we've looked at the conditions of the world during the kingdom. Now we look at the characteristics of the people during the kingdom. His, Judah's, eyes are dull from wine, and his, Judah's, teeth white from milk. Now, the pronoun his refers to Judah. It is not a reference to the Messiah. Now, in verse 12, we come to a rather common and unfortunate rendering of the Hebrew. The unfortunate translation is the one used by the King James Version and other versions, such as the Jewish Publication Society of 1917. The unfortunate translation used in the King James Version, which was printed in 1769, goes like this: His, Judah's eyes will be red with wine. The NASB, his eyes are dull from wine. The Jewish Publication Society, his eyes shall be red with wine. Now, let me allow Rabbi Hertz to deal with these renderings. His comments come from the Hertz Pentateuch, the Pentateuch and Haftorahs that were compiled by Rabbi Hertz. Rabbi Hertz states, "This rendering is absurd. According to it, Judah's eyes are red from excessive drinking, and Jacob's blessing is that Judah should be a drunkard." The word rendered, red, however, means sparkling, rendered that way in the Septuagint, and then he quotes his two resources, Gunkel and Gressman. And the correct translation of the verse is, his eyes are more sparkling than wine. So the verse compares the eyes of the people to the sparkling appearance of wine. The eyes of the people sparkle the way wine sparkles in the sunlight. Their eyes are not bloodshot from drunkenness or dull from an alcoholic stupor. In addition, we have to ask this question about the final phrase of the verse: does drinking milk make your teeth white? Does drinking milk make your teeth white? Obviously, the answer is no. You don't get white teeth from drinking milk. Otherwise, many of us would never have to go to the dental hygienist. Okay? The correct translation of the final phrase is therefore, as the NIV states it, his teeth whiter than milk. So here's Genesis 9:12 corrected, or perhaps I should say improved. I don't know which would be better. Judah's eyes are more sparkling than wine, Judah's teeth whiter than milk. Now that fits the context. Again, it's a comparative statement describing a healthy, flashing smile. So what is the point of verse 12? The point of the imagery is strength and health for Judah and for the world. Everyone living in the Messianic kingdom will be vigorous and sturdy. Illness, all the way from a cold to cancer, will be a thing of the past. Doctors and nurses and dentists and dental assistants will be out of a job. Hospitals and clinics and convalescent centers will no longer be needed. Praise the Lord. This will be life during the Messianic kingdom. What a better life than we experience now. I'm looking forward to it. So on this glorious note of hope and promise, Jacob's message to Judah comes to its completion. So we'll bring our exegesis of the prophecy to the close with this summary. Summary of Genesis 49:10. Number 1, the Messiah will be the final ruler of Judah's royal supremacy and the apex of that leadership. 2, the Messiah must be able to prove his tribal descent from Judah. 3, the Messiah had to come before 70 A.D., before the 70 A.D. destruction of the temple, when the genealogical records were destroyed, in order to prove his descent from Judah. 4, Messiah had to be on the scene by 30 A.D. or later, when the authority for administering capital punishment was removed from the Sanhedrin by the Romans through the removal of the scepter. The scepter had been removed from Judah. So here's that time frame again. He must be on the scene by 30 A.D. when the scepter is removed by the Romans. Judah's authority is now cut away. But he has to be there before 70 A.D. in order to verify his descent from Judah. So the Messianic time is between these dates. That's when we should expect the Messiah to appear, between 30 A.D. and 70 A.D. And by the way, he did. Number 5, Messiah will bring ultimate blessings to all the earth. So we've stated in very clear terms that we believe that this prophecy portrays and predicts the coming of Israel's glorious Messiah King, Yeshua. Are we accurate in this assessment? Is this just some wild notion with no basis? Is this just a clever deception dreamed up by Gentile Christian missionaries in order to deceive the Jewish people? Are there other views in the Jewish community that supports our position? Are we just, running out in left field here all alone? So with questions like this in mind, we need to move to the next section of our study, and that is rabbinic support. And there is a rich amount of material in rabbinic literature that supports our contention that this prophecy is messianic in nature. Now, I'm not saying that they see it fulfilled in Yeshua. No way. But I am saying that the rabbis agree with us that this section of Scripture is messianic in nature. All right, let's start with Targum Onkelos. The rod of the ruler will not depart from the house of Yehudah, nor the law enforcer from between his feet, nor a scribe from his children's children forever, until Shiloh comes. The Mashiach will come, for his is the kingship, and to him shall be an assembly of nations. The nations will listen. The Targum Onkelos clearly sees this as messianic in nature. Targum Jerusalem also paraphrases the verse like this: King shall not cease from the house of Yehudah, nor Sepharim, teaching the law from his children's children, until the time that the King Mashiach shall come. Whose is the kingdom, and to whom all the kingdoms of the earth shall be obedient. Can't get much more messianic than that. Rashi, Rabbi Shlomo Yitzhaki, a very, very influential Jewish rabbi. Rashi says, until Shiloh comes. This refers to the King Messiah, to whom the kingdom belongs. Then the Talmud, Sanhedrin 98b. What is the Messiah's name? The school of Rabbi Shila say his name is Shiloh, for it is written, until Shiloh comes. Of course, that's using Shiloh as a proper noun. We already looked at that verse. And Midrash Mishlei. Rav Huna says the Messiah is called by 7 names, and they are Yinon, Tzidkenu, our justice, Tzemach, shoot, Menachem, comforter, David, Shiloh, Elisha. And Shiloh, or Shiloh there, is taken as a proper noun. Then the Midrash Rabbah on Genesis mentions 6 messianic comments, has 6 messianic entries, I should say. So let's take a look at Midrash Rabbah in Genesis. Number 1, the scepter, the staff, shall not depart from Judah, alludes to the Messiah, son of David, who will chastise the state with a staff. As it says, thou shalt break them with a rod, a staff of iron. Obviously messianic, isn't it? Midrash Rabbah number 2. Judah is a lion's whelp. Rabbi Hama ben Rabbi Hanina said this alludes to Messiah, the son of David. Midrash Rabbah number 3. He stooped, he couched, from Zedekiah until the Messiah. Now this is refers to an interval of time in the rabbinic thinking. Stooped is the start of the period. That's the previous king Zedekiah. Couched, that's the end of the period, the final king, Messiah. So that's what they're trying to communicate there in point 3. Point 4, until Shiloh come. This indicates that all the nations of the world will bring a gift to Messiah, the son of David. That's a little different interpretation. We'll look at that later. But again, this is messianic. Number 5 from Midrash Rabbah. Until Shiloh cometh. This alludes to the royal Messiah. That's very clear. And unto him shall be the obedience of the peoples. He, the Messiah, will come and set on edge the teeth of the nations of the world. So the Messiah is going to rule the world, according to the Midrash Rabbah in Genesis 49:10. Number 6, the final entry. The scepter shall not depart from Judah, and this refers to the throne of kingship. The throne given of God is forever and ever. A scepter of equity is the scepter of thy kingdom. When will that be? Nor the ruler's staff from between his feet. When he comes to whom it is written. And there is Shiloh as an abbreviation. The crown of pride of the drunkards of Ephraim shall be trodden underfoot. And then we're to see a footnote. But yeah, the Messiah receives the kingdom there. And the footnote at the end of the quote reads, which the Midrash refers to the Messianic era. So all these 6 entries are Messianic in nature, all refer to the Messianic era. All right, Targum Jonathan paraphrases the verse, kings shall not cease, nor rulers from the house of Yehudah, nor Sopharim, teaching the law from his seed, till the time that the king, the Mashiach, shall come, the youngest of his sons, and on account of him shall the peoples flow together. How beauteous is the king and Mashiach who will arise from the house of Yehudah. All right, we have a very messianic paraphrase there. Then to the Jerusalem Talmud, and by the way, that notations there, the numbering there is Rabbi Jacob Neusner's notations. Jerusalem Talmud, it is taught 40 years before the temple was destroyed, again 30 A.D., the right to judge capital cases was taken away from Israelite courts. The authority of Judah had been removed. Well, had Shiloh come? You better believe he had. And then the Jerusalem Talmud 41a, we looked at this earlier. The Gemara continued its question, and it was taught in a Baraita 40 years before the destruction of the Second Temple. The Sanhedrin was exiled from the chamber of hewn stone and sat in the store near the Temple Mount. And Rabbi Yitzhak bar Avudimi says the intent of the statement concerning the relocation of the Sanhedrin is to say that they no longer judge laws of fines. The Gemara asks, does it enter your mind to say that they no longer judge laws of fines? It's known that the Sanhedrin would judge laws of fines for hundreds of years after the destruction of the temple. Rather, he must have said that the Sanhedrin no longer judged cases of capital law. You see the point? Once the Sanhedrin left the chamber of hewn stone, the court's power to judge capital cases was nullified. Rome took over the authority. Rome took over the authority. So I'd like to graph out this, what the rabbis are trying to say here. You know, I'm kind of a graphy guy, and sometimes, or most of the time, it helps me to understand it when I can see it. So there's our timeline. And the Messiah had to be on the scene during or after 30 AD, when the right to capital punishment was removed from Israel. So there's the one bookend of the timeline. Messiah had to come before 70 AD, so his genealogy could be verified. And there's the other bookend of the timeline. Messiah had to come between those two timelines. He can't come today. He can't verify his descendancy from Judah today. You know? Oh well. All right. Let me finish with this. Well, I've got about 10 minutes. Let me close this section with comments by Shlomo Riskin in the International Jerusalem Post in 2001. He makes this comment: the Baal HaTurim discovers a striking gematria, arithmetical equivalence, between the phrase Yavo, 13, Shiloh, 345, Shiloh comes, and the word Mashiach, 358. Now, what is he talking about? What is gematria? Glad you asked. Let me explain gematria to you a little bit. You see, every Hebrew letter has a numerical value. Adding up these values creates the arithmetical equivalence that is so important to Orthodox Judaism. This is also called gematria. Gematria is an imaginative, rabbinic, exegetical technique. Imaginative. There's lots of imagination in this. All right. Let's take a look at arithmetical equivalence, or gematria. The first letter of the Hebrew alphabet has the value of 1. The second, Beit, value of 2. The third, Gimel, value of 3. The fourth, Dalet, the value of 4, etc., through all the letters of the alphabet. So here is the word Yavo. And so we are going to add up its letters. Aleph is 1, Beit is 2, Yod is 10. You add them all together and you get 13. That's the numerical or arithmetical equivalence. All right, the Baal HaTurim discovers a striking gematria, arithmetical equivalence, between the phrase Yavo, 13, Shiloh, 345, Shiloh comes, and the word Mashiach, 358. Now here's what he's doing. Yavo has a value of 13. Shiloh has a value of 345. You add them together and you get a total of 358. And if you add up all the letters in Mashiach, you get a total of 358. So from the Orthodox point of view, gematria reveals that Genesis 49:10 refers to the Messiah. Gematria is also another source of support for us. All right, now let's move on to Genesis 49:11. And we'll start with Targum Jonathan. Targum Jonathan's paraphrase: how beauteous is the king, the Mashiach, who will arise from the house of Yehudah. He hath girded his loins and descended and arrayed the battle against his adversaries, slaying kings with their rulers. You see, this is the second coming. Neither is there any king or ruler who will stand before him. The mountains become red with the blood of their slain. His garments, dipped in blood, are like the outpressed juice of grapes. Well, Yonatan is paraphrasing Isaiah 63, 1 through 6 in his rendering of Genesis 49:11. He's telling us, go to Isaiah 63, 1 through 6. There's more information there, is what he's telling us. All right, well, let's see what Isaiah 63, 1 through 6 says. All right, now as we start Isaiah 63, 1 through 6, Isaiah is probably standing in Jerusalem. He's looking south, he's looking toward Basra, he's looking toward Edom. And as he looks south, he sees a magnificent individual approaching him. And he doesn't know who this magnificent individual is, so he wants to ask him and find out. And the section is a two-question conversation that Isaiah has with the magnificent figure. So let's begin. He begins with his first question. Who is this who comes from Edom with garments of glowing colors from Bozrah? This one who is majestic in his apparel, marching in the greatness of his strength. Who is this incredible person? The answer, it is I who speak in righteousness, mighty to save. Well, that identifies the Messiah pretty clearly, doesn't it? He's the only one who can save. Second question from Isaiah. Why is your apparel red, and your garments like the one who treads in the winepress? Verse 3 is the answer. I've trodden the wine trough alone, and from the peoples there was no man with me. I also trod them in my anger and trampled them in my wrath, and their lifeblood is sprinkled on my garments, and I stained all my raiment. For the day of vengeance was in my heart, and my year of redemption has come. I looked, there was no one to help. I was astonished, there was no one to uphold. So my own arm brought salvation to me, and my wrath upheld me. I trod down the people in my anger and made them drunk in my wrath, and I poured out their lifeblood on the earth. What does that section sound like? It should be familiar to you. You should recognize it as Revelation 19:15, because Isaiah 63, 1 through 6 is a detailed look at the second coming that Revelation 19:15 does not supply. Here's Revelation 19:15. From his mouth comes a sharp sword, so that with it he may strike down the nations, and he will rule them with what? That rod of iron. You've seen that before, haven't you? And he treads the winepress of the fierce wrath of God the Almighty. So it's Yeshua treading the winepress on the occasion of his second coming. All right, well, I see I only have less than 3 minutes to go. So let me call it quits right here. We're looking at rabbinic support for our contention that Genesis 49:11 is messianic. And we've just had time to look at one selection, Targum Jonathan. So we'll pick it up next session, we'll pick it up with Targum Unclus. We'll see what Targum Unclus has to say about the messianic nature of Genesis 49:11. So we'll see you next session. So glad to have you as our students. I hope this session has been exciting and interesting and uplifting for you. We'll see you next session. Lahitraot. Lahitraot.